My name is Lila June Wallace. Before my life fractured, I believed I was a simple story, written in the soft, humid air of Charleston. I owned a small flower shop on a cobblestone street, a place called the Bloom and Bough, where the scent of damp earth and fresh-cut hyacinths clung to the air like a second skin. My days were measured in the unfurling of petals and the tying of ribbons. I lived in a little carriage house behind a grander home, its walls painted the color of a summer sky and its tiny garden overflowing with jasmine and climbing roses. My parents, Eleanor and Richard Wallace, were the anchors of my world, a quiet kindergarten teacher and a gentle librarian who had filled my childhood with books, patience, and the unwavering certainty of their love. I thought my identity was as solid as the centuries-old oaks that line the avenues, their branches draped in Spanish moss like soft gray shawls. I was Lila, the florist. Lila, the daughter of the kindest people I knew. Lila, a woman content in the quiet rhythms of her life. But contentment is a fragile vessel, and I was about to learn that mine was floating on an ocean of secrets, an ocean whose depths were about to be stirred by a single, devastating ripple. It began on a Tuesday in late April, the kind of day in Charleston where the heat presses down, heavy and wet, a promise of the deep summer to come. I'd been battling a migraine all morning, a dull throb behind my right eye that made the bright sunlight feel like a physical assault. My own remedies, lavender oil on my temples, a cool cloth, quiet darkness, had failed. By afternoon, defeated, I drove to the Palmetto Pharmacy, a local institution with a rattling air conditioner and floors that creaked with history. The pharmacy was cool and smelled of antiseptic and old paper. I gave my name to the pharmacist and leaned against a counter, waiting, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing a monotonous, irritating tune. A woman ahead of me in line turned to put a basket of toiletries on the counter, and her eyes met mine. And then, everything stopped. It wasn't a look of casual recognition. It was a shattering. Her face, pleasant and lined with the fine map of her late 50s, went stark white. Her hand, holding a bottle of lotion, began to tremble so violently that the bottle slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor. "Oh my God," she breathed, the words less a sound and more a puff of air, a ghost of a voice. She didn't look away from my face. Her gaze was one of such raw, disbelieving shock that it felt like an intrusion, like she was seeing not just me, but something deep inside me I didn't know was there. People sometimes told me I looked familiar, that I had a face they felt they knew. My best friend, Genevieve, called it a storyteller's face, open and kind. I offered the woman a small, hesitant smile, the kind you give a stranger in a moment of public awkwardness. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice soft. She didn't smile back. Her eyes, a startlingly clear blue, filled with tears that welled and spilled over, tracing paths through the light powder on her cheeks. "You look just like my sister," she said, her voice a ragged whisper. "I get that sometimes," I said gently, trying to soothe the charged air between us. "No," she shook her head, a frantic, desperate motion. "No, you don't understand." She took a step closer, and I instinctively took one back. The intensity of her stare was unnerving. "She went missing 25 years ago." The words hung in the air, heavy and strange. The polite smile on my face faltered. A cold prickle, like ice water, traced its way up my spine. The buzzing of the lights seemed to grow louder, the air thicker. "I'm so sorry to hear that," I said, the platitude sounding hollow even to my own ears. "What was her name?" She just stared at me, her chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. For a long moment, the only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator unit and the distant cough of another customer. Then, she spoke two words that slid into my heart like a shard of glass. "Your name." The world tilted. The floor seemed to drop away beneath my feet. "My name," I repeated, my voice barely audible. "Sophie," she said, and the name was a wound. "Sophie Grace Byrne. My middle name is June. Lila June Wallace." But for a dizzying, terrifying second, The name Sophie felt like a bell ringing in a long-forgotten room of my mind. It felt familiar. I shook my head, trying to clear the sudden fog. "My name is Lila," I insisted, my voice trembling. The woman stepped closer still, her gaze frantic, searching. "You have her eyes," she said, her voice cracking. "That exact shade of green, with the little gold flecks near the pupil. And the scar above your eyebrow." My hand flew to my right eyebrow, to the small, silvery line that bisected the arch. It was a part of me, a landmark on the map of my face. I'd gotten it when I was a little girl, falling from the high bar of a swing set. My father had carried me home, his face pale with worry. My mother had cleaned the wound, her touch infinitely gentle, while I cried more from fear than from pain. I remembered it so clearly. The smell of the antiseptic, the scratchy wool of my father's sweater, the comforting lullaby my mother hummed. Or did I? "How old are you?" the woman demanded, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "I'm 30, I answered automatically. "My birthday is in May." She would be 30. Her birthday is May 12th. Tears were now streaming down her face, unchecked. She had a birthmark on her left shoulder blade. A tiny one, shaped like a comma. The pharmacy suddenly felt like it was closing in on me. The air was too thin to breathe. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I have a birthmark on my left shoulder blade. A small, brown mark I'd always thought looked like a tiny, sleeping bird. A comma. "I'm sorry," I stammered, backing away. I think you're mistaken." But even as I said it, a chasm of doubt was opening inside me. This woman's grief was too real, her details too specific. With trembling hands, she dug into her handbag and pulled out a worn, creased photograph. This was her. This was Sophie. I took the photo, and the ground gave way completely. A little girl of about 5 stared back at me, a gap-toothed, joyful grin on her face. She was holding a bright yellow pail and shovel, sand clinging to her chubby knees. She wore a blue sun hat that had slipped to the back of her head, revealing a mess of wavy, light brown hair. But it was her face. It was my face. Not a resemblance. Not a likeness. It was the exact face from the handful of childhood photos I possessed. The same wide-set green eyes with their flecks of gold. The same slightly crooked smile. The same sprinkle of freckles across the bridge of her nose. "I have to go," I whispered, shoving the photo back into her hands. "I'm sorry. I have to go." I turned and fled. I didn't wait for my prescription. I didn't look back. I burst out of the pharmacy's door and into the thick, humid embrace of the Charleston afternoon. The heat was suffocating, but I ran, my sandals slapping against the pavement, my breath coming in ragged sobs. I didn't stop until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so hard it took 3 tries to get the key in the lock. I sat in the driver's seat, the engine off, the windows up, and stared at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. But the face looking back at me was no longer my own. It was a question mark. It was the face of a stranger named Sophie. The truth, I was beginning to understand, doesn't ask for an invitation. It doesn't wait until you're ready. It arrives like an unannounced storm, tearing the roof off the comfortable house of your life and leaving you exposed to the elements. My name is Lila June Wallace, I thought. But for the first time in my 30 years, I wasn't sure. I was starting to wonder, with a terror that was cold and absolute, if my name was actually Sophie Grace Byrne, and if the entire beautiful, quiet story of my life had been written over someone else's tragedy. That evening, the carriage house felt alien, a stage set for a life that was no longer mine. The scent of the jasmine climbing the trellis outside my window, usually a comfort, was cloying and strange. I moved through the small rooms like a ghost, my own familiar objects, the worn velvet armchair, the stack of art books, the collection of sea glass on the windowsill, seeming to belong to someone else. My hands, still trembling, went to the bookshelf. Tucked behind a row of poetry was a single, slim photo album bound in faded blue linen. It was the only one I had from my childhood. My parents, Eleanor and Richard, had always told me the rest. All the baby pictures and early memories had been lost. A terrible shame, my mother would say, her voice soft with regret. There was a fire in the storage unit where we kept everything from our time in Atlanta, just before we moved to Charleston. We lost so much. It was a story I had always accepted without question. Why would I question it? It was just a sad, unfortunate event, a blank space in our family history. Now, that blank space felt like a gaping wound. I opened the album. The first page was titled Lila's Third Birthday in my mother's elegant, looping script. There I was, a little girl with a smudge of chocolate on her cheek, wearing a pink dress. I looked happy. I flipped the page. Christmas, aged 3.5, hugging a large, stuffed bunny. The first day of preschool, age 4, holding my father's hand, my face a mixture of excitement and terror. I flipped backward from the first page. Nothing. The pages were pristine, empty. My recorded life began at age 3. There was no Lila at age 2, no Lila at age 1. No photograph of a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket. No first steps, no first smile. My breath hitched. The story of the fire had always been a gentle lament, a thing of sadness. Now it felt like a lie. A carefully constructed wall built to hide something. I grabbed my phone, my thumb hovering over Mom in my contacts. What would I even ask? Mom, a stranger in the pharmacy showed me a photo of a missing girl who looks exactly like me. Did you lie to me about the fire? Did you lie to me about everything? The questions were monstrous, unthinkable. To ask them would be to accuse the two people I loved most in the world of an unimaginable betrayal. Instead of calling them, I called Genevieve. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and no nonsense. Lila? You sound awful. Is it the migraine? Jen, I whispered, my voice breaking. Can you come over? Something's happened. She was there in 20 minutes, her sharp, intelligent face etched with concern. She found me on the floor of my living room, the photo album open in my lap, tears streaming down my face. I told her everything, the words spilling out in a chaotic, desperate torrent, the woman in the pharmacy, her trembling hands, the name Sophie, the scar, the birthmark, the photograph. Genevieve, ever the pragmatist, listened without interruption. She knelt on the floor beside me, her presence a solid, calming force in my swirling chaos. When I finished, she didn't offer empty platitudes. She picked up the photo album and looked at the first picture. Okay, she said, her voice even. Let's be logical. A strong resemblance is possible. Coincidences happen. This wasn't a resemblance. General, it was me, I insisted. And the scar? The birthmark? And my parents' story about a fire that conveniently destroyed every single photo of me before the age of 3. Genevieve chewed on her lower lip, a habit she had when she was deep in thought. The fire story is convenient, she admitted. What was the woman's name? She didn't tell me her name. Just her sister's. Sophie Grace Byrne. She said she went missing 25 years ago. Genevieve pulled out her phone. From where? She didn't say. Okay. Sophie Grace Byrne, missing, 25 years ago. She typed for a moment, her brow furrowed. Then her face changed. Oh, Lila, she breathed. I found something. She turned the phone toward me. It was an archived page from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And there she was. The little girl from the photograph. My face. Name. Sophie Grace Byrne. Date of birth. May 12, 1993. Missing since June 4, 1998. Missing from Raleigh, North Carolina. Age now 30. Details. Sophie was last seen playing in her fenced-in front yard. She has green eyes with gold flecks, light brown hair. A small scar above her right eyebrow and a comma-shaped birthmark on her left shoulder blade. Every word was a hammer blow, cracking the foundations of my life. Raleigh, North Carolina. Not Atlanta, where my parents said we'd lived. June 4th, 1998. I would have just turned 5, not 3. The details were too perfect, too precise. There's more, Genevieve said softly, scrolling down. There's a Facebook page. Finding Sophie Byrne. It's run by her older sister, Clara Byrne. She clicked on the link. The page was a digital shrine, a testament to 25 years of relentless hope. There were dozens of photos. Sophie on a swing set. Sophie eating a popsicle on a sunny porch. Sophie asleep in a car seat, her cheek smushed against a stuffed rabbit. An age-progressed photo showed what Sophie might look like at 25. It was an eerie, computer-generated echo of my own face. And then I saw it. A family portrait. A smiling man and woman, a girl of about 10 with bright blue eyes, and little Sophie, perched on her father's knee. The caption read, "The Byrne family. Patrick, Anne, Clara, and our Sophie. Taken 1 month before she was taken from us. We will never stop searching." The woman in the photo, and had the same clear blue eyes as the woman in the pharmacy. But it wasn't her. It was the 10-year-old girl. Clara. The woman I had met was my sister. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't just looking at a missing girl. I was looking at my family. A family I had no memory of. A mother, a father, a sister. "I need to talk to her," I whispered, my heart aching with a grief I didn't understand. It was a grief for a life I hadn't known I'd lost. With Genevieve's help, I found Clara Byrne's personal profile. Her profile picture showed the woman from the pharmacy, her blue eyes still bright, though now nested in fine lines, smiling with 2 young children who must have been her own. My niece and nephew. My fingers trembled as I typed out a message, my words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "Ms. Byrne, this is Lila Wallace. We met today at the Palmetto Pharmacy. I think we need to talk." She replied in less than a minute. "I've been praying you would reach out. Can we meet? Tomorrow? Please." We met at a small, quiet coffee shop on a side street, away from the tourist crowds. I arrived first, choosing a secluded table in the corner. My hands were slick with sweat, and I kept twisting the silver ring on my finger, a nervous habit from childhood. When Clara walked in, our eyes met across the room, and the connection was instant, a silent acknowledgement of the monumental thing that stood between us. She carried a large, worn canvas tote bag, which she placed carefully on the seat beside her. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed with sleeplessness, but they held a fierce, desperate hope. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice husky with emotion. "I haven't slept. I was so afraid I'd scared you away." "You did," I admitted honestly. "I'm still scared." For a few moments, we just sat in silence after ordering our coffees, the air thick with unspoken questions. Then, Clara reached into her tote bag. "I want to show you some things," she said gently. "So you understand." She pulled out a thick binder and laid it on the table. It was filled with yellowed newspaper clippings, photocopied police reports, and flyers with Sophie's smiling, gap-toothed face. "Have you seen this child?" She was playing in the front yard. Clara began, her voice low and steady, as if she'd told this story 1,000 times. "Our house in Raleigh. We had a white picket fence. My mom was inside on the phone. I was supposed to be watching her from the porch, but I got distracted by a book. I was 12. It was only for a few minutes. When I looked up, the gate was open, and she was gone." Her voice broke, and she paused to compose herself. "We thought she'd just wandered off. The whole neighborhood searched. The police came. Hours turned into days. Days into weeks." She traced the outline of Sophie's face on a flyer. "The police suspected a stranger abduction. A non-family abduction. They're the hardest to solve. There was no ransom note, no witnesses." She then pulled out a worn, much-loved photo album, different from the binder of official documents. This one was filled with life. She opened it to the first page. This was you. The day we brought you home from the hospital. A wrinkled, red-faced newborn stared up from the glossy page. My mother, and was holding her, her face glowing with love. My father, Patrick, leaned over her, his expression one of pure adoration. Clara turned the pages slowly, narrating a life I couldn't remember. You loved strawberries, but you hated bananas. You were terrified of thunderstorms. You couldn't sleep without this. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a small, threadbare stuffed rabbit. It was pale yellow, with long, floppy ears and one button eye. I stared at it. A flicker of something, a ghost of a memory, sparked in the darkness of my mind. The feeling of soft, worn fur against my cheek. The name surfaced on my lips before I even thought it. Barnaby, I whispered. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes again. You remember, she breathed. Oh, Sophie, you remember him. I shook my head, confused. I don't know how I knew that name. He was your constant companion. You took him everywhere, she said, pushing the rabbit across the table towards me. My fingers closed around it, the texture impossibly familiar. What happened to our parents? I asked, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. Clara's face clouded with a deep, abiding sadness. Dad died 6 years ago. Cancer. The not knowing, it ate away at him. He spent every spare moment, every dollar we had, searching for you. Following dead-end leads, hiring private investigators. He never gave up hope, but it broke his heart. She took a shaky breath. Mom is still with us. She lives in an assisted living facility now. After Dad died, she just faded. She has dementia. Some days she's lucid, and she asks about you. Other days, she thinks you're still 5 and you're just in the other room, playing. The story was a weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. This was the life that had been stolen. This was the family that had been shattered. Lila, she said, her voice pleading. The people who raised you, the Wallaces. They loved you, I can see that. You have a kindness about you. But they must have known. Your face was everywhere. How could they not know they were raising a missing child? The question I had been avoiding, the accusation I hadn't dared to form, was now laid bare on the table between us, next to the stuffed rabbit and the photos of a life I should have lived. I don't know, I whispered. There's a way to be certain, Clara said, her expression firming with resolve. She pulled one last thing from her bag, a DNA testing kit. I did mine yesterday. It's just a cheek swab. We can send them both in, pay for the express service. In a week or 2, we'll know for sure. I looked at the small box. It held the power to either confirm my deepest fears or send me back to my life, forever haunted by the ghost of a girl who looked like me. But I already knew the answer. In my bones, in the strange familiarity of a stuffed rabbit's name, in the echo of my own face in a stranger's photos, I knew. Taking the kit was an act of surrender. It was an acceptance that the story of Lila Wallace was ending, and the story of Sophie Byrne was about to begin. The week I waited for the DNA results was a strange, suspended limbo. I went to my shop each day, my hands moving through the familiar tasks of trimming stems and arranging bouquets, but my mind was a million miles away. I felt like a fraud in my own life. I'd look at my reflection in the shop window and see a stranger. I'd answer to Lila, and the name would feel like a costume. The email arrived on a Thursday morning. My heart seized when I saw the subject line, "Your DNA results are in." For a full 10 minutes, I just stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the mouse. This was the precipice. Once I clicked, there was no going back. I took a deep breath and clicked. The page loaded. At the top, in bold letters, Clara Byrne, sister. 99.99% probability. I was Sophie Grace Byrne. The confirmation didn't bring relief, only a profound and hollow sorrow. I sat on the floor of my quiet carriage house and wept. I wept for the little girl who was taken from her family. I wept for the parents who had lost her. I wept for the sister who had never stopped searching. And I wept for Lila Wallace, the person I had been, who was now dissolving like sugar in water, leaving only the raw, unknown truth of Sophie. The confrontation with my parents, with Eleanor and Richard, was the heaviest, most painful task of my life. I drove to their comfortable home on a quiet, tree-lined street, the house I had grown up in, and every familiar detail felt like a betrayal. The rose bushes my mother tended so carefully, the porch swing my father had built, the welcome mat that read "Home Sweet Home." They were in the living room, reading when I arrived. They smiled when they saw me, the same warm, loving smiles they had always given me. The sight of it broke my heart. "Lila, honey, what a nice surprise," my mother said, starting to rise. "Sit down," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "We need to talk." I didn't ease into it. I couldn't. I laid the printed DNA results on the coffee table between us. They stared at it, their smiles vanishing, replaced by a slow, dawning horror. Eleanor began to cry first, silent, racking sobs that shook her entire body. Richard's face went ashen. He seemed to shrink into the cushions of the couch. "We wanted a child more than anything in the world," Eleanor whispered through her tears, her voice a pathetic, broken thing. "We tried for so many years. So many losses. The adoptions kept falling through. We were broken, desperate." Richard finally spoke, his voice raspy, his eyes fixed on the floor. "A distant cousin of mine. She worked at a clinic. She told us she knew of a young woman, a transient, who couldn't care for her child. She said the mother wanted to give her up, to give her a better life. She arranged it. We paid her. Cash." "You paid her?" I asked, the words tasting like poison. "You bought me." "We told ourselves we were rescuing you," he said, not looking at me. "From a life of poverty and neglect. It was easier to believe that." "But you knew," I pressed, my voice rising, fueled by a quarter-century of stolen truth. "When you saw my face on the news, on the flyers, you had to have known you weren't rescuing me. You were hiding me." "We didn't look," Eleanor confessed, her face buried in her hands. "We actively avoided it. We moved here, to Charleston, to start over. We changed our names. We built a new life. For us. For you. We loved you so much, Lila. We do love you." "My name is Sophie," I said, and the words were a judgment. "You loved a lie you created. You let a family grieve for their daughter for 25 years. You let a father die of a broken heart. You let a mother lose her mind to sorrow. You call that love?" The silence in the room was immense, filled only by the sound of my mother's weeping. I looked at the two people who had raised me, who had bandaged my knees, read me bedtime stories, and cheered my every success. I had loved them without reservation. And in that moment, I saw them for what they were, not monsters, but flawed, desperate people who had made a selfish, catastrophic choice, and then spent a lifetime reinforcing the lie. The legal proceedings were a blur of lawyers and quiet, sterile rooms. Given the time that had passed, their age, and their clean records, Eleanor and Richard were not sentenced to prison. They received several years of probation, a hefty fine, and mandatory community service. I didn't push for more. In a way, I knew they were already living in a prison of their own making. Their punishment was knowing that they had lost me, not to a stranger in a park, but to their own deception. Meeting my mother, and for the first time, was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Clara took me to the facility where she lived. She was sitting in a sunroom, looking out at a garden. On her lucid days, Clara had told her the news. "Sophie," she whispered when she saw me, her faded blue eyes clearing for a moment with a flash of recognition. She reached out a frail, trembling hand and touched the scar above my eyebrow. "You fell from the swing," she said, her voice clear as a bell. "Your father was so worried." And then, just as quickly, the moment was gone. She smiled a vague, pleasant smile. "It's lovely to meet you, dear." Have you seen my little girl? She was just here a moment ago. My relationship with Eleanor and Richard is a fragile, tentative thing now. We are learning a new, painful language of honesty. They are in therapy. I am in therapy. We are trying to rebuild something from the wreckage, but the foundation is gone. The love is still there, a complicated, tangled knot of gratitude and betrayal, but the trust may never return. I am now, legally and in my heart, Sophie Lila Byrne. I kept Lila as a part of my name because that person, the florist who loved the quiet rain, is a part of me. She is the person I became in the space where Sophie was lost. I spend my weekends in Raleigh with Clara and her family. My nephew, a boisterous 8-year-old, is teaching me the rules of baseball. My niece, a quiet, artistic 10-year-old, shows me her drawings. With them, I am slowly, carefully, piecing together the life that was meant for me. Clara tells me stories about our father's terrible jokes and our mother's beautiful singing voice. She is filling in the 25-year silence. Sometimes, when I am alone in my shop, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the flowers, I think about the two lives I have held. The one I lived and the one that was stolen. They are not separate things anymore. They have grown together, grafted onto each other like two different roses on a single stem, creating something new and resilient. My roots are tangled, reaching into two different soils, but they are my own. I learned that identity is not a destination, but a journey. It is not a solid thing we are given, but a mosaic we create from all the pieces of our lives, the broken ones, the lost ones, and the ones we find along the way. My story began with a lie, but I have chosen to finish it with the truth in all its painful, beautiful complexity. My name is Sophie, and I am finally home.